1994. The former NFL player was accused of murdering his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ronald Goldman. There was a low-speed chase of his white Ford Bronco, which we saw from helicopter. Los Angeles DA Marcia Clark was against the dream team of Robert Shapiro, Johnny Cochran, and F. Lee Bailey. The defense maintained that racism in the LAPD had resulted in mishandling of DNA evidence, especially that by Detective Mark Furman. The mostly black jury acquitted Simpson. I was at work that day that the verdict was read, and I was in the lunchroom at work. The black people in the room burst into cheers, applause, and high fives, while the white folks sat silent and stunned. All of us had seen the same evidence, but through very different lenses. It is the same with reparations. Here are some statistics from a 2021 Pew Foundation study on attitudes toward reparations. The question asked was, should descendants of people enslaved in the U.S. be repaid in some way, such as given land or money? Among the U.S. adults surveyed, 68% said no to reparations, while 30% said yes, there should be reparations. A little more than 2/3 were against, and a little less than 2/3 were for. Now let's look at the two racial subgroups. Among white respondents, 80% said no, 18% said yes. While among black respondents, only 17% said no, and 77% said yes. I'm going to compare two age subgroups. The 18 to 29-year-olds were pretty evenly split, with 52% against and 45% for. Amongst us elders, those over 65, 81%, 4/5, were against. Only 18% were for reparations. Now let's look at political parties. Those who were or leaned Republican were 91% against, while those who were or leaned Democrat were split, 49 to 48, right down the middle. As to income, lower income folks were close to even, 54 to 42. Middle and upper income polled at 72% against and 27% for reparations. Now, we might spend time wondering aloud why these numbers are what they are, but I just want you to notice that there are many viewpoints on reparations, and that they have something to do with our race, our age, our political affiliations, and or our income bracket. So we're just going to move on at this point, keeping an open mind about those who think differently than we do. What are reparations? Repairing, healing, and restoring. People harmed because of their group identity. That includes the people themselves, their descendants and families, and even whole communities that were affected. The actions of governments, institutions such as universities or corporations, and even whole families caused harm. The harmed group is entitled to whatever they need to heal and repair themselves. In legal terms, they deserve to be made whole. ServPro's motto, like it never even happened, right? This is a principle of international human rights law. There are 5 conditions necessary for reparations: acknowledging the harm, apologizing for it, educating people about it, and creating memorial places that tell the story. Stopping the harm, that seems pretty obvious, but guaranteeing that it won't be repeated? That's a tough one. Restoring what was lost, restitution. If restitution is not possible, financial compensation. And rehabilitation, legal, medical, psychological care, and services to the people that were harmed. You might wonder what reparations are not. They are obviously not saying you're sorry while dodging the accountability. Saying you're sorry while continuing to benefit from the harm. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, well. And the next 3, paying one person's bills. That isn't going to do it. Giving money to Black groups. Or divesting from harmful stock situations and investing in other situations, or in just writing a check without doing the other work that's involved. So these last 3 items are things that individuals might do, and they might be good things in themselves, but they do not address racism as a system of policies and practices, as a part of our culture. Okay. Chattel slavery. Does anyone know what chattel slavery is? Anyone know what chattel is?
Is it considering
property?
making living things property?
Right. In legal terms, chattel is any property that can be moved. So you have land and buildings, that's real estate. And then everything else, because the building, you don't move the buildings, they're part of the land. Everything else, like furniture, jewelry, or livestock, as opposed to land and buildings, is chattel. In chattel slavery, a person can purchase and own another human being, control that person absolutely, and own any offspring from that person. No, that's good. That's good. So the thing about chattel is that in the United States, and this is different from other systems of slavery. I mean, there have always been slaves. Usually they were people who were taken in war, or they were enslaved for some punishment, for some crime, but they never lost their personhood, so to speak. But in the U.S. system, they were like a horse, livestock. They were livestock. You bought and sold them. You owned them as long as they lived. Back before the ASPCA, you couldn't do things to horses. What you did then, you could do things to human property that was not under any kind of protection. And it went on for their entire life until they died. And if they had any children, the children were born into that system. And this was a way to build wealth, by the way, impregnating female slaves and creating offspring. Okay. Let's move on. This is what the movement for Black Lives lists as some of the harms to Black people as a result of chattel slavery. Racial terror. I think the entire Black population in this country lives under an amount of terror and trauma that is only now being addressed by that community as they begin to be able to admit to themselves and each other that they have been traumatized, that they need mental health services to help them move past it. State-sanctioned segregation. So in the South, but in other places too. Whites-only spaces. In theaters, in restaurants, water fountains, buses. Theft and destruction of land, property, businesses, or homes. Housing discrimination and redlining. Structural exclusion from programs. There's an effort being made now to make restitution to Black farmers who were not, did not have the same access to federal funds to help them that white farmers did. And there's now a number you can call, you can make an application with the federal government to be made whole if you have been in that situation, which is cool. The ongoing impacts of slavery, family separation, state-sponsored sterilization, medical experimentation, mass criminalization and incarceration, and the targeting of disabled Black people. Okay. So what have we learned so far? Reparations are specific forms of repair to specific groups for specific harms. They require institutional responses as opposed to individual responses, which includes changes in culture and policy. And it's not all about the money. It includes acknowledgement, apology, memorialization, if you will, of these situations. The adding into the history that everybody in here was taught to include this chapter, these chapters, this ongoing story, which is not told. Germany does it. They have Holocaust studies in all their curriculums. South Africa does it, where they talk about apartheid. Okay, I'm just going to take a breath right here. Let's advance the slide. Let's just all take a few breaths. Breathing in and out at your own pace. Absorbing this information. And coming in touch with any feelings that may be arising as we talk about this difficult topic. Applaud yourself for being here, for being willing to hear, for opening your mind and your heart to hear. We can stay open, and we will not be destroyed by this knowledge. We will be empowered by it, okay? All right, so let's go on to a more cheerful part of this presentation. The how of reparations. We're going to start with a failed attempt. At the end of the Civil War, General Sherman met with 20 Black pastors and asked them, what do you want? Now that the Union is in control, the Confederacy has been defeated, what do you want for your people? And what they said was, we want to live amongst ourselves on our own land. They knew the key for them, as mostly agricultural people, not given any access to education, etc., that farming, their own land, was what was important to them. And they also knew that the South was not ready for them to live among white people. They feared how that would go for them, and so they wanted their own land. The map shows in red the area that was taken back from Confederate landowners. It stretched from Charleston, South Carolina, through the entire state of Georgia and down into Florida. It was 400,000 acres of really good land. The idea was to divide the land. They thought they had formerly enslaved black people, about 100,000. So they wanted to divide the land into 40-acre parcels.
I think the expression was 40 acres and a mule.
That's right, because the Army gave some of their mules to the new settlers so that they could plow their land. And that name stuck, 40 acres and a mule. Unfortunately, President Lincoln, under which this program was started, died, was assassinated 4 months later by what we would call, at least a nutcase, okay? Somebody who had been radicalized by some kind of propaganda. And the new president, Andrew Johnson, rescinded the order of giving the 40 acres to formerly enslaved people and returned the land to its Confederate landowners. With no land and no place to go, the formerly enslaved blacks were forced to be sharecroppers. How many of you know about the sharecropping system?
A little bit.
Okay.
A little bit. Yes.
The deal was that you could farm the owner's land, and that a small portion of it would be given to you to farm for yourself and your family. So you could, raise vegetables and that sort of thing. Feed the chickens. But it often worked out that there was no money in it for you. When the landowner deducted all their expenses, quote unquote, there was no money at the end of the year for you. When the crops were brought in, the farmer took all the profits for themselves. Let's take a look at an attempt by Evanston, Illinois. Oh, here we go. Who else has gotten reparations? Jewish victims of the Nazi Holocaust got some reparations from Germany. Japanese Americans interned in the United States concentration camps during World War II. Alaska Natives for land, labor, and resources that were taken from them. Victims of the massacre in Rosewood, Florida, and their descendants. Native Americans for violations of treaty rights. And political dissenters in Argentina and their descendants. Now, probably none of these really made those populations whole, but they were an attempt. Evanston, Illinois. In 2019, they authorized reparations for redlining in their city that confined blacks to a certain area whose real estate values were suppressed. It is for Black Evanston descendants or other blacks who can show harm from the past Evanston housing policies. The payments are $25,000, which can be used for mortgage assistance, down payments, and home renovations, and 16 of them have been awarded so far. Well, that's not a lot.
It's 4 years.
I know, that's 4 years, so they've done 16. Who knows what their application, what the regulations were. The other thing is their funding was from a marijuana sales tax, and they may have been getting their marijuana. It took us in New Jersey a long time to get the dispensaries all in place, and so licenses and all that. I don't know if that's what was the holdup, but their income from the marijuana sales has been less than expected, but they are now tapping the real estate transfer tax to raise funds for this program. Let's look at another one. The state of California authorized in 2020. The other thing we have to remember is the pandemic was in the middle of that. And that really created some havoc in these programs. California did a statewide reparations task force, and the restitution would be for African American descendants in California who can trace slave or free ancestors back to the late 19th century, so 1890s or so. And the proof is what's the tricky part there. You may have oral confirmation of a grandfather, great-grandfather that were affected. You may have some paperwork, and you may have I don't know. There is some DNA kinds of things that you could do. But that's what they decided that would be their target population. And it would be for historical discrimination in voting, housing, education, disproportionate policing and incarceration, for health harms, harms to black businesses, etc. The task force is working now. Their final report went to the California legislators in June, and a bill is supposed to go to lawmakers in December with the findings, creating a legislation that will do that. Now everybody's eyebrows went up with the estimated cost, which is $800 billion. Wow. So that's that. Let's see another one. The city of Baltimore has created a Community Reinvestment and Reparations Commission. And they are targeting communities that were subject to high levels of cannabis enforcement in the past 20 years. That really seems doable to me, that you would be able to pick the neighborhoods that were targeted for low-level drug crimes with disproportionate sentences. So the money will go toward community-based initiatives to organizations that receive the funds have to be physically located in the neighborhood. The funds cannot be used to fund police, and the funding will come from legal cannabis sales. There's a story in the Asbury Park Press today about the profits that are coming to the state and communities as a result of cannabis sales, legal cannabis sales that are taking off apparently in New Jersey. And some of that money is targeted toward communities historically targeted for low-level drug crimes. There's also a provision in that legislation that favors minority-owned cannabis businesses to give them a hand up. Supposed to.
Yes.
Again, practice sometimes doesn't meet theory when it comes to that stuff, right?
New York is still better at that.
Yeah, New Jersey.
Yeah.
Close.
And now we're going to get pretty local with New Jersey. Our difficult reality is that New Jersey was deeply involved in slavery. It is referred to as the slave state of the North. Right now, it is one of the most racially diverse states in the United States. And it has some of the worst racial disparities in wealth, health, education, and incarceration. The racial wealth gap in New Jersey between white folks and black folks, $300,000.
How's that determined?
Um,
Annual income? I mean,
No, it's usually what you own, like your house, and your savings. So
Inherited wealth.
if you have a 401k with $100,000 and you own a home worth $200,000,
okay.
you're
You're there.
estimated. Yeah, something,
Yeah,
something like that.
thank you. Yes, I knew there was a formula. So the good news is that we have a reparations council. It is an outgrowth of the Say the Word reparations campaign, which the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice did this campaign, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, because when they talked about reparations, nobody wanted to say the word. Nobody wanted to talk about it, so they had this campaign, say the word. At least, here's where we can start. Here are the co-chairs, Tajania Henderson from Rutgers Law School, and Khalil Gibran Muhammad from the Harvard Kennedy School of Law. Moving right along. It's been set up with 9 subject areas. The history of slavery in New Jersey, because we need to know what that is. Public narrative and memory, that's about memorializing. Economic justice, segregation in New Jersey presently. What they call democracy, which is voting rights and such, access to voting. Public safety and justice, which we'll talk about. The over-policing criminal justice system and the incarceration system. The health equity. Another article in the paper this morning talks about health outcomes, maternal health outcomes in New Jersey, which are really pitiful for a state as rich as ours, and the disparities between the results for white mothers and black mothers. Environmental justice, the fact that a lot of pollution ends up in neighborhoods that were unable to prevent it from being put in their neighborhood. And faith and black resistance, so including and honoring and memorializing the faith communities and their continuing role in getting justice for their congregants. Okay, so the plan is that each of those 9 committees will meet over the next 2 years, and luckily the first committee has made its report, and we're going to see a little bit about it today. They do research, they're going to have public comment sessions, and have a final report with recommendations, and those committee reports will be combined into a council final report, which will be published on Juneteenth, 2025. That's something to look forward to. It's a blueprint for New Jersey's proposed reparations task force. So we don't have a task force yet, but we have a study commission. So do the study commission, maybe we'll get the task force. It may be a model for other states because we are the first in the country to take this approach. And it is to build systems in which black people are empowered to thrive in New Jersey. Well, wouldn't that be something? Okay, let's get a look at this first report. The history of slavery in New Jersey was released the end of September. In the 17th century, the Dutch in New Netherlands, which was what New Jersey was called, relied on enslaved laborers to clear land, construct towns, create roads, grow food, etc. By the 1720s, New Jersey slavery became influenced by the harsh form in the South and in the Caribbean. Their justification was that it was ordained by God. These people were the descendants of Ham. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, people from Africa were considered to be the descendants of that branch of the Abrahamic family, and therefore.
That's pre-Abrahamic. That's Noah.
Right, is it?
Yeah, that's Noah.
Oh, that's Noah. Okay, thank you. I welcome. But more than that, it was really economically profitable. At that time, there was an incentive. If you came to New Jersey as a settler, you were given 150 acres of land, and for each slave that you brought, you got an additional 150 acres.
Oh my God.
New Jersey enslavers were dragged kicking and screaming into abolishing slavery. Okay. In 1804, we were the last state in the North to pass a gradual abolishment law, which was something like, I forget the word that they used, but it was moving from slavery towards a sharecropper system where the formerly enslaved people were basically enslaved again by this system. By 1830, 2/3 of the slaves in the North were in New Jersey. And in 1866, we were the last northern state to ratify the 13th Amendment. Yeah. Moving toward today, we had our Jim Crow laws until the Civil Rights era, and redlining and other practices have continued into the present. There are disparities in education, home ownership, health outcomes, and incarceration rates. Now, this would be a good time to take a little breath too, because New Jersey's involvement affects all of us. Just take some breaths right here. You can close your eyes. And you can know that this information will empower us. And as we go deeper into this history and these understandings, we will come to a place where we're able to at least understand a little bit what our Black and brown brethren are talking about. Yes, good. Okay. What are we, as UUs, called to do? Well, the first thing I think is to look at some assumptions that we can make. You are good. As a matter of fact, white people are good at heart. We're all children of God. We all have inherent worth and dignity. And we are not, in this religion, into people who are born into an original sin and just, go downhill from there. You are good, born good, still good, and doing the best that you can. We all are doing the best that we can with this information. Some of us are kind of gobsmacked by this new information. Another point is that your ancestors were good, and they were doing the best that they could with the information that they had and with the culture that they were born into. And I will tell you that my parents were racist. My grandparents were racist all the way back, because that was the culture that they were born into. And as working class people, they were looking to lord it over somebody, so, well, at least I'm not, this. All of us have been caught up in these racist systems. We did not create them. As I like to say, we didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world was turning. Right? All of us were and are being fed misinformation. So we have to tease out what is true. And currently we are all complicit because we are all enmeshed in this system. It's the water that we swim in as fishes, this racist culture. Though we never asked for it, we have white privilege. And just by virtue of being white, our lives were very different from birth on. And as you look back at your own history, you can see where it has been to your advantage, your educational advantage, where you lived, what services you got from the community, those kinds of things, your health. Though we did not start it, it is up to us to fix it to the extent that we can. Okay. The inner work that's involved has to do with accepting that there is this whole history, accepting that right now we have some complicity. We can't divorce ourselves from this culture. It is our culture, and we have to deal with it as we find it. We need to handle our feelings of guilt and shame with other white people so that we don't become really inappropriate around black people. You know, it would be easy to be carrying this guilt in your mind, and then as you encounter a black person, everything gets really awkward. Maybe you've experienced that. So handling it among white people is the way to go with that. And to watch for and tackle your own implicit bias. Bias is not unchangeable. We can notice when we're doing things. And I was thinking, when Ms. Magazine came out, one of the things that was in the first issue was click. And click was when you noticed sexism, right? Wasn't it click? So, and people would walk around and they would hear, you know, somebody, a man or a woman say something that was either oppressive or, in the woman's case, an internal oppression. And there would be a click, just like that. So we can develop our own inner cliques around racism and note and begin to notice when it's occurring. Yep. Okay. I have some wisdom from a friend of mine who spent a year going to NAACP meetings. And it has to do with joining an organization where you are one or maybe one of the few white people there, but you are wanting to be in that organization. She shared all this with me over the course of the year because of her, all the feelings that came up for her, including a lot of frustration with the group that she was with. Humbly take your place there out of the spotlight. As white people, we don't realize how when we come in, we tend to take control, or we tend to have helpful suggestions, or we tend to think it should be done some way that we know works. And for the black people, this brings up a whole bunch of shit, if I can be frank. So take your place out of the spotlight. It needs to be their goals, their process, their way of running meetings. And you need to listen, 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 and learn. And keep showing up, because there's no reason in the world for them to trust you. It will take longer than you think. It took her, I want to say 9 or 10 months before people accepted that she was not, because, you know, they'll have a person show up, it's kind of like you. Sometimes you have a person show up, they start coming, you get all kinds of hopeful. Sorry, sir. But it is the reality. And then when they leave, there's like a disappointment. And so we have to be careful not to harden into the position of people come and they leave. You know, nobody stays. So, and this happens in Black organizations. Good meaning, white people come in, they make a couple of mistakes, or they don't, but they decide it's not for them, it's too much for them, and they leave. So you need to keep showing up to build that trust. Take the menial tasks, take the minutes, do the mailings, lick the envelopes. Defer to Black leadership. Do nothing on your own initiative. Even if you're doing mailings and you think of a nifty way to do the mailings more efficiently, oh no. Do the mailings the way the mailings have always been done. It's not your job to do anything about that. Do show up for marches, demonstrations, and such. That gives a certain legitimacy, if you will, to folks that are marching. And just watch, what do they need from you? New Jersey Faith Action, which is our legislative arm in Trenton for the whole state, has a reparations task force. They track legislation in the New Jersey Senate and Assembly. You can call, email, and write in your support for legislation that they're supporting, or for the legislation that they're opposing. And the way to do that would be to get on their email list, and then things will come to you. They're doing a really neat program right now, which is a Friday action hour. And every Friday, they pick an action that they think is fairly easy for people to do.
Just the first Friday of the month.
Just the first Friday of the month, so it's monthly. Not too bad.
No, it's good.
And you can, and everybody can write postcards together, or they can make phone calls together. And so you see on the Zoom call everybody that's working on those things. They do have a lot of demonstrations. The ones in Trenton are available to us. The ones in North Jersey are a longer story. You can attend hearings. They're usually in Trenton. And if you're brave, you can testify. And so I'll put the task force's address in the round robin. Another really good organization is the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice. They have a wonderful Say the Word video, which gives you a whole lot of information in a very entertaining format, and I'll put that in the round robin. And then there were three national reparations organizations from which I got a lot of the material for this talk. The National African American Reparations, I think it's Consortium or Council Commission. The National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and COBRA, and the Movement for Black Lives. That ends my slideshow. Thank you all for your kind attention.